Welcome back, accomplices. We hope you've had a great week and enjoyed our midweek drop.
We want to thank Tia again for being here with us last week and hope to have her back again in the future. As we mentioned last week, we are diving into medical mishaps, so let's get into it.
Although we couldn't find any statistics on how many doctors intentionally killed their patients, we do have some other facts for you. The study of medical killers is barely in its infancy. Medical murder clinicide is the unnatural death of multiple patients in the course of treatment by a doctor. Medical murder must be distinguished from euthanasia in that patients do not request the termination of their life. Serial medical killing is a relatively new phenomenon. The role model is Dr. Marcel Pichot, the worst serial killer in French history. At some level, these doctors have an awareness of what they are doing, countered by an overweening refusal to acknowledge the implications or desist from further treatment.
Treatment killer offenses usually occur on the basis of serial mental illness, but may include the contentious area of euthanasia killing. Doctors have frequently been accomplices in state repression, brutality, and genocide in direct violation to their sanctioned role to relieve suffering and save lives. They have become mass murderers on an exceptional scale, making any comparison with a doctor killing his own patients almost risible. Many clinical doctors have extreme narcissistic personalities, a grandiose view of their own capability, and inability to accept that they could be criticized or need assistance from other doctors. Such doctors develop a God complex, getting a vicarious thrill out of ending suffering and by determining when a person dies. A few doctors on this list are Kermit Gosnell, Philadelphia abortionist's House of Horrors. Alleged to be the obstetrician who delivered Will Smith as a baby, Gosnell operated an abortion clinic, more properly an abortion slaughterhouse in West Philadelphia.
In West Philadelphia, born and raised on a playground is where I spent most of my days.
Chilling out, maxing, relaxing, all cool and all shooting some b-ball outside of my school. If you know, you know. Gosnell was an early advocate for legalized abortion and told a reporter in 1972 that he was very concerned about the sanctity of life. But as the years passed, rumors spread throughout the Black communities of West Philly, not only that Gosnell would abort babies far into a woman's third trimester, but about the dangerous and unsanitary conditions of his clinic. According to the report issued by a team of investigators, others noted that fetal remains were stored in bags, milk jugs, orange juice cartons, and even in cat food containers. Throughout the clinic, investigators found the remains of 45 fetuses scattered throughout the premises. In a grisly process known as snipping, Gosnell would sever the spines of viable fetuses to ensure their death. He received 3 murder convictions for his practice alone, and after Gosnell's murder conviction, Philadelphia's DA referred to him as barbaric. The mayor called him a monster living in our midst. Christopher Dunst, manic surgeon, purposely maimed patients. In December of 2011, a Texas neurosurgeon emailed another doctor and said, "I am ready to leave the love and kindness and goodness and patience that I mix with everything else that I am and become a cold-blooded killer." Christopher differs from everyone else on this list in that his MO was to violently hack and maim at adult patients while performing surgery on them. He purposefully severed an artery in a female patient's spine, causing her to bleed to death. He severed another patient's vocal cords and left a surgical sponge in his throat. He was convicted of murdering 2 patients, earning him the nickname Dr. D, and maiming 4 others. He is suspected of purposefully maiming 33 patients and is now serving a life sentence.
We also have Maxim Petrov. He paid home visits and robbed his victims while they were unconscious. Operating out of St. Petersburg, Russia, Petrov's MO was to visit patients at home, unannounced, and when they preferably were alone. He'd inject them with an anesthetic and then steal their belongings while they were unconscious, even if he had to pluck wallets out of their pockets and pluck rings from their fingers. In 1999, During his 30th robbery, he committed his first murders when a patient's daughter returned home to find Petrov in the process of stealing her father's valuables. Petrov stabbed the girl to death with a screwdriver and strangled her father to death with a stocking. When he was arrested in January 2000, police found several stolen items from murder victims in his flat. And then also Linda Hazard. She was the enema-wielding homeopath. Long before Gwyneth Paltrow made fasting fashionable, Dr. Linda Hazard was licensed to practice as a fasting specialist. Hazard had no medical degree, but due to a legal loophole, was able to practice medicine in the state of Washington. Hazard authored Fasting for the Cure of Disease and promoted the notion that food-caused diseases and illnesses could be cured with a lifestyle of minimal food consumption. That sounds awful. I like maximum food consumption. In 1902, she opened a sanitarium called Hazard's Institute of Natural Therapeutics. Patients were fed only a few spoonfuls of broth or juice and given daily enemas. While many walked away pleased with their treatment, an estimated 40 patients died while in Hazard's care. Hazard told her critics that if someone died during a fast, they had something that was going to kill them soon anyway. In 1912, Hazard was convicted of manslaughter for the death of a wealthy woman who weighed less than 50 pounds.
My leg doesn't even weigh less than 50 pounds. I'm just saying.
Prosecutors showed that while starving the woman to death, Hazard had stolen her jewelry and forged her will. She was sentenced to 20 years, but served only 2 years, thanks to a pardon from the governor. She opened another sanitarium in 1920 and continued her fasting practice until the facility burned to the ground in 1935. When Hazard fell ill in 1938, she starved herself to death. A little bit of a spoiler, we have a plan for a deep dive into this one for you.
Well, those aren't even the worst of it. The cases we will present to you today are two of the most prolific serial killers in history, both of whom were doctors.
So, since Tio was nice enough to pick me to go first last week, you are going to start us off this week.
I wouldn't expect anything less. So a little backstory about my case I'm doing. It was actually suggested to me by a coworker, her quote-unquote sweetie, as she calls him, worked with the man that I'm going to be talking to you about today. Michael Joseph Swango was born in Tacoma, Washington.
Hey, same.
How did I not know that about you?
I don't know.
Anyways, he was raised in Quincy, Illinois, the middle child of Merrill and John Virgil Swango. Michael's father was a career United States Army officer who served in the Vietnam War. Upon his return home from Vietnam, John Swango became depressed and inevitably became an alcoholic. Don't they all? He and his wife Merrill divorced shortly thereafter, and growing up, Michael saw little of his father and, as a result, was closer to his mother. He was valedictorian of his 1972 Quincy Catholic Boys High School class, and during high school, he played clarinet in the band. Michael served in the Marine Corps, graduating from recruit training at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. He received an honorable discharge in 1980. He saw no action overseas during his service, but his training in the Marines left him with a commitment to physical exercise, which I cannot relate to at all. When not studying, Michael was frequently seen jogging or performing calisthenics on the Quincy University campus, and he was known to perform push-ups as a form of self-punishment when criticized by instructors. Michael graduated from Quincy summa cum laude and was given the American Chemical Society Award. Following his graduation, Michael went to medical school at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine, or SIU. During his time at SIU, Michael displayed troubling behavior. Although he was a brilliant student, he preferred to work as an ambulance attendant rather than concentrate on his studies. It was observed that Michael had a fascination with dying patients, and it was overlooked at the time that many of the patients assigned to Michael ended up coding or suffering life-threatening emergencies. with at least 5 of them dying. Michael's lackadaisical approach to his studies caught up with him a month before he was supposed to graduate, when it was discovered that he had faked checkups during his OB-GYN rotation. Fellow students had suspected that he had been faking checkups as early as his second year, but this was the first time he had been caught. He was almost expelled, but was allowed to continue after one of the members of the committee voted to give him a second chance. At the time, a unanimous vote was required for a student to be dismissed, so that one vote saved his ass. Several students and faculty members had raised concerns about Michael's competence to practice medicine. Eventually, the school allowed him to graduate on the condition that he repeat his OB-GYN rotation and complete several assignments in other specialties. Michael did go on to graduate from Southern Illinois University School of Medicine and was given the nickname 00 Swango by his classmates. The nickname was more of an insult due to him having to repeat some of the program. Despite a very poor evaluation in his dean's letter from SIU, Michael was given a surgical internship at Ohio State University Medical Center in 1983, to be followed by a residency in neurosurgery. While he worked in Rhodes Hall at OSU, nurses noticed that apparently healthy patients began dying mysteriously and with alarming frequency.
So this fucker barely passed his schooling, and he was going to take up a residency in fucking neurosurgery?
Yes.
What? I don't have confidence in that at all.
It gets better. In each instance, Michael had been the floor intern. One nurse even caught Michael injecting medicine into a patient who later became strangely ill. The nurses reported their concerns to administrators, but were met with accusations of paranoia. Michael was cleared by a cursory investigation in 1984. However, his work had been so messy and careless that OSU pulled his residency offer after his internship ended in June. Later, it emerged that OSU officials feared that Michael would sue if he was fired without cause, so resolved to quietly push him out of the hospital as soon as possible after his internship ended. Michael returned to Quincy in July of 1984 and began working as an emergency medical technician, or EMT, with the Adams County Ambulance. Despite the fact that he had previously been fired from an ambulance service in Springfield after making a heart patient drive themselves to the hospital.
This guy.
Soon, many of the paramedics on staff began to notice that whenever Michael would make coffee or bring in food, several of them became violently ill with no apparent cause. In October of that year, Michael was arrested by the Quincy police after arsenic and other poisons were found in his possession. When police searched his home, they found a mini laboratory of poisons, including handwritten recipes for ricin, botulism, and supersaturated cyanide. On August 23, 1985, Michael was convicted of aggravated battery for poisoning his coworkers. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. And that is where my coworker's pretty much husband worked. Michael's conviction led to recrimination at OSU. A scathing review by Dean James Meeks concluded that the hospital should have called the police and also revealed several glaring shortcomings in its initial investigation of Michael. Nonetheless, it was another decade before OSU formally conceded that it should have called in outside investigators. Prosecutors in Franklin County also considered bringing charges of murder and attempted murder against Michael, but they decided against it for lack of physical evidence. Michael only served 2 of the 5 years for the non-fatal Illinois poisonings and was released from prison in August of 1987. He went on to work as a counselor at the State Career Development Center in Newport News, Virginia. Unfortunately, he was forced out after being caught working on a scrapbook of disasters while on the clock. Michael then worked as a lab tech for ATI Coal, which later became Vanguard Energy.
He just took up some scrapbooking.
Yeah, but it was his own personal scrapbook. I kind of get into that a little bit later. It was not a family or friends, I can tell you that much.
I still can only picture him just like cutting out little borders to the pictures he glued in there.
Giving everybody little heart eyes. During his time at ATI Coal, several employees sought medical attention with complaints of persistent and increasing stomach pains. Around that same time, Michael met Kristen Lynn Kinney, who worked as a nurse at Riverside Hospital. The two fell in love and planned to marry. Michael was employed until 1991 when he resigned his position to seek out a new position as a doctor. Michael legally changed his name to Daniel J. Adams and tried to apply for a residency program at Ohio Valley Medical Center in Shealing, West Virginia. In July 1992, he began working at Sanford USD Medical Center in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. In both cases, Michael forged several legal documents that he used to reestablish himself as a physician and respected member of society. He forged a fact sheet from the Illinois Department of Corrections that falsified his criminal record, stating that he had been convicted of a misdemeanor for getting into a fist fight with a coworker and received 6 months in prison, rather than the 5 years for felony poisoning that he served. Most states will not grant a medical license to a violent felon, considering such a conviction can be evidence of unprofessional conduct. He forged a restoration of civil rights letter from Virginia Governor Gerald L. I really don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to wing it. Balize, that stated the governor had decided to restore Michael's right to vote and serve on a jury, and that his decision was based on reports from friends and colleagues that he had committed no further crimes after his misdemeanor. It also stated that Michael was leading an exemplary lifestyle. Michael established a sterling reputation at Sanford. However, when he attempted to join the American Medical Association, or AMA, it conducted a more thorough background check than that of Sanford and found out about the poisoning conviction. On Thanksgiving Day, the Discovery Channel aired an episode of Justice Files that included a segment on Michael Swango. Amid the AMA report and calls from frightened colleagues, Sanford fired Michael. Remember Kristen Kinney? Well, she went back to Virginia after Michael was fired. During her time in South Dakota, she had suffered from violent migraines that stopped after she left him. I don't think that's a coincidence.
I think you would be correct.
The AMA temporarily lost track of Michael, who managed to find a place in the psychiatric residency program at the Stony Brook University School of Medicine in New York. His first rotation was in the internal medicine department at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northport. Once again, his patients began dying for no explicable reason. 4 months later, Kristen Kinney committed suicide, and arsenic was found in her body at the time of her death. Kinney's mother, Sharon Cooper, was horrified to find out that a person with Michael's history could be allowed to practice medicine. She contacted a friend of Kinney, who was a nurse at Sanford, who in turn alerted Sanford's dean, Robert Talley, to Michael's whereabouts. Talley phoned Jordan Cohen, the dean of Stony Brook. Under intense questions from the head of Stony Brook's psychiatric department, Alan Miller, Michael admitted he had lied about his poisoning conviction in Illinois. He was immediately fired. The public outcry resulted in Cohen and Miller being forced to resign before the end of the year. Before Cohen resigned, he sent a warning about Michael Swango to all 125 medical schools and all 1,000 teaching hospitals across the United States, effectively blacklisting Michael from getting a medical residency at any American institution. Since the latest incident took place at a Veterans Affairs facility, federal authorities got involved. Michael dropped out of sight until mid-1994 when the FBI found out he was living in Atlanta working as a chemist at a computer equipment company's wastewater facility. Soon after, the FBI alerted the company and Michael was fired for lying on his job application. The FBI obtained a warrant charging Michael with fraudulent credentials to gain entry to the VA hospital. By that time, Michael had fled the country. In November of 1994, he settled in Zimbabwe and used forged documents to obtain a job at, I'm going to butcher this, so I'm so sorry, Menne. It's Mnene, Lutheran Mission Hospital. I'm sure at this point it comes as no surprise that again his patients began dying mysteriously. Who knew? As a result of suspicions of the medical director there, Dr. Christopher Zashiri, Michael was suspended. Sadly, due to the failure to perform adequate autopsies, no firm conclusions could be drawn. During his suspension, Michael hired lawyer David Coulthard to enable him to return to clinical practice. He also appealed to the authorities at Pilo Hospital, Bulawayo, to allow him in the interim to continue working as a volunteer there. However, it was opposed by a surgical resident who had often found Michael snooping around mysteriously in the ward and in the ICU, even when not on call. Michael was suspected of sudden deaths of some patients, but there was no real proof. At this time, Michael rented a room in Bulawayo from a widowed woman who subsequently became violently sick after a meal she had prepared for herself and a friend. The woman consulted a local surgeon, Michael Cotton, who suspected arsenic poisoning and persuaded her to send her hair samples for forensic analysis. The sample confirmed toxic levels of arsenic. The lab reports were passed by the Zimbabwe Republic Police Criminal Investigation Department through Interpol to the FBI, who subsequently visited Zimbabwe to interview Cotton and the pathologist in Bulawayo. In the meantime, Michael had sensed that authorities were closing in on him. He crossed the border to Zambia and then Namibia, where he found temporary medical work where he was charged with poisoning as well. In March of 1997, he applied for a job at the Royal Hospital in Saudi Arabia using a false resume. During this time, the chief investigator for the Office of Inspector General of the Department of Veterans Affairs, Tom Valerie, consulted with forensic psychiatrist Charlene Thompson. Because of her clinical expertise, Thompson was able to review documents and evidence to give a criminal profile of Michael, along with her assessment of why he had committed such crimes. Valerie was called by the FBI to discuss holding Michael. He called Richard Thomason, don't know if those two were married, but whatever, who was stationed at the DEA's Manhattan office to discuss the case. Richard's conversation focused on Michael lying on his government application to work at the VA, where he had prescribed narcotic medications. There was enough evidence for Immigration and Naturalization Service agents to arrest Michael. He had returned to the U.S. to obtain a visa, and in June of 1997, while he was on a layover at Chicago O'Hare International Airport on his way to Saudi Arabia. Faced with hard evidence that his fraudulent activities and the possibility of an extended inquiry into his time in Zimbabwe, Michael Swango pled guilty to defrauding the government in March of 1998. In July of that same year, he was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. The sentencing judge ordered that Michael not be allowed to prepare or deliver food or have any involvement in preparing or distributing drugs. Although the FBI, the VA, and prosecutors for the Eastern District of New York were convinced that Michael was a serial killer, they knew it would be difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. They also knew that they had a limited amount of time to gather the proof. Federal inmates must serve at least 85% of their sentence before being eligible for time off with good behavior, meaning that they likely only had 3 years to prove that Michael Swango was indeed a murderer. They feared that if they could not find enough evidence to convict him, he would likely kill again. The government used this time to amass a dossier of Michael's crimes. As part of the investigation, prosecutors exhumed the bodies of 3 patients and found poisonous chemicals in them. They found evidence that Michael paralyzed patient Baron Harris with an injection of what was supposedly a sedative. The sedative caused him to lapse into coma, and Harris died on November 9th, 1993. Additionally, prosecutors found evidence that Michael had lied about the death of Cynthia Ann McGee, who he treated during his internship at OSU. Michael claimed that she suffered heart failure, but in reality, he had killed her by giving her a potassium injection that stopped her heart. On July 11th, 2000, less than a week before he was due to be released from prison for the fraud charge, federal prosecutors in Long Island, New York, filed a criminal complaint charging Michael with 3 counts of murder and 1 count each of assault, false statements, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. At the same time, authorities in Zimbabwe charged him with poisoning 7 patients, 5 of whom died. A week before the indictment was handed up, FBI agents interviewed Michael in prison. They told him that on the day he was due to be released, he would be extradited to Zimbabwe. to face charges for murder and attempted murder. Knowing that he would likely face the death penalty for his crimes in Zimbabwe, Michael began talks for a plea agreement. Eventually, prosecutors agreed to not pursue the death penalty for extradition to return for Michael accepting a sentence of life in prison without parole. Michael Swango was formally indicted on July 17, 2000 and pleaded not guilty. On September 6th of 2000, he pled guilty to 3 counts of murder as well as a count of wire fraud and mail fraud. At his sentencing hearing, Michael admitted to causing 3 murders, lying about his role in causing a 4th, and lying about his 1985 conviction. Prosecutors read horrifying pages from Michael's notebook or scrapbook that described the joys he felt during his crimes and explained how he enjoyed watching people die. Judge Mishler sentenced Michael to 3 consecutive terms of life without parole. He is currently incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, commonly known as ADX Florence Supermax, or the Alcatraz of the Rockies, in Florence, Colorado. He was sent to ADX at his own request. He had been stabbed by another inmate while serving time for lying to the VA and feared he would be attacked again if he were placed in the general population. Although Michael Swango was only found guilty and admitted to 4 deaths, the FBI believes he was responsible for as many as 60 deaths, which would make him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. And that is my story.
I still just can't get over the fact that he barely passed med school and he got a residency as a neurosurgeon.
Yeah. I can't believe that they just kind of like turn the other cheek.
Yeah. Multiple times.
Yeah. Every single time.
My time has come. Harold Frederick Shipman Jr. was born on January 14th, 1946, on the Bestwood Estate in Nottingham, England. He was the second of the 3 children of Harold Frederick Shipman Sr. and Vera Britton. Harold Sr. was a truck driver, and they were devout Methodists. When growing up, Shipman was an accomplished rugby player in youth leagues. He attended High Pavement Grammar School in Nottingham, which he left in 1964. He excelled as a distance runner, and in his final year at school, he served as vice captain of the athletics team. Shipman was particularly close to his mother, who died of lung cancer when he was 17. In the later stages of her disease, she had morphine administered at home by a doctor. Shipman witnessed his mother's pain subside despite her terminal condition until her death on June 21, 1963. In November 1966, he married Primrose May Oxtoby, and the couple went on to have 4 children. Shipman studied medicine at Leeds School of Medicine, graduating in 1970. He began working at Pontefract General Infirmary in Yorkshire, and in 1974, he took his first position as a general practitioner at the Abram Ormerod Medical Center. The following year, Shipman was caught forging prescriptions of pethidine for his own use, which pethidine, like the brand name is Demerol, which is a synthetic opioid pain medication. He was fined £600 and briefly attended a drug rehabilitation clinic in York. He worked as a general practitioner at Donnybrook Medical Center in 1977 in Hyde in Manchester. Shipman continued working as a GP in Hyde throughout the 1980s and established his own surgery at 21 Market Street in 1993, becoming a respected member of the community. In March 1998, Linda Reynolds of the Brook Surgery in Hyde expressed concerns to John Pollard, the coroner for the South Manchester District, about the high death rate among Shipman's patients. In particular, she was concerned about the large number of cremation forms for elderly women that he needed countersigned. Police were unable to find sufficient evidence to bring charges and closed the investigation on April 17th. An investigation report later blamed Greater Manchester Police for assigning inexperienced officers to the case. After the investigation was closed, Shipman killed 3 more people. A few months later, in August, taxi driver John Shaw told the police that he suspected Shipman of murdering 21 patients. Shaw became suspicious as many of the elderly customers he took to the hospital, who seemed to be in good health, died in Shipman's care. Shipman's last victim was Kathleen Grundy, a former mayor of Hyde who was found dead at her home on June 24, 1998. He was the last person to see her alive. He later signed her death certificate, which recorded her cause of death as old age. Grundy's daughter, solicitor, which is legal practitioner, Angela Woodruff, became concerned when fellow solicitor Brian Burgess informed her that a will had been made, apparently by her mother, with doubts about its authenticity. This will excluded Woodruff and her children, but left £386,000 to Shipman. At Burgess's urging, Woodruff went to the police, who began an investigation. Grundy's body was exhumed and found to contain traces of diamorphine, which is heroin, often used for pain control in terminal cancer patients. Shipman claimed that Grundy had been an addict and showed them comments he had written to that effect in his computerized medical journal. However, police examination of his computer showed that the entries were written after her death. Shipman was arrested on September 7, 1998, and was found to own a Brother typewriter of the type used to make the forged will. The police investigated other deaths Shipman had certified and investigated 15 specific cases. They discovered a pattern of his administering lethal doses of diamorphine, signing patients' death certificates, and then falsifying medical records to indicate that they had been in poor health. Shipman's first trial began at Preston Crown Court on April 5, 1999. He was charged with the murders of 15 women by lethal injections of heroin, all between 1995 and 1998. Shipman's legal representatives tried unsuccessfully to have the Grundy case tried separately from the others, as a motive was shown by the alleged forgery of Grundy's will. On January 31, 2000, after 6 days of deliberation, the jury found Shipman guilty of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. Mr. Justice Forbes subsequently sentenced Shipman to life imprisonment on all 15 counts of murder, with a recommendation that he be subject to a whole life order, which means no possibility of parole, to be served concurrently with a sentence of 4 years for forging Grundy's will. On April 11th, 11 days after his conviction, Shipman was struck off the medical register by the General Medical Council. So, as far as what I understand from that is he was still technically a general practitioner for 11 days after he got convicted of 15 murders.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Oh, I mean, though, Swango over there. That man, they just... they could not keep him out of a hospital.
2 years later, Home Secretary David Blunkett confirmed the judge's whole life order, just months before British government ministers lost their power to set minimum terms for prisoners. While authorities could have brought many additional charges, they concluded that a fair hearing would be impossible in view of the enormous publicity surrounding the original trial. They also figured that the 15 life sentences already imposed rendered further litigation unnecessary. Shipman became friends with fellow serial killer Peter Moore, also known as the Man in Black, while in prison. Shipman denied his guilt, disputing the scientific evidence against him. He never made any public statements about his actions. Shipman's wife, Primrose, maintained that he was not guilty, even after his conviction.
I would just like to say, of course his wife maintained that he was not guilty.
Right.
She's not going to admit that shit.
Right.
No pun intended.
Shipman hanged himself in his cell at H.M. Prison, Wakefield, at 6:20 a.m. on January 13th, 2004. just one day before his 58th birthday.
What a fucking cop-out.
Right?
Ugh. When they do that, I just feel like there's no justice.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly I'll say it in a second, but that's exactly what the victims' families felt like, too. He was pronounced dead at 8:10 a.m. Reports indicated that he had hanged himself from the window bars of his cell using his bed sheets. After Shipman's death, his body was taken to the mortuary at the Medico Legal Center in Sheffield by undertaker's van for a post-mortem examination. West Yorkshire coroner David Hinchliffe eventually released the body to his family after an inquest was opened and adjourned shortly after. Some of the victims' families said they felt cheated, as Shipman's suicide meant they would never have the satisfaction of a confession, nor answers as to why he committed his crimes. Home Secretary David Blunkett admitted that celebration was tempting, saying, quote, "You wake up and you receive a call telling you Shipman has topped himself, and you think, is it too early to open a bottle? And then you discover that everybody's very upset that he's done it." End quote.
Hey, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. I don't drink anymore. I gave that up years ago, but yep. When you get bad news, it's never too early to start drinking. That's all I'm saying.
Or good news in that guy's case.
Yes. Yeah, that too.
Shipman's motive, even when I say it slow, it still sounds like Shipman.
Oh, shitty pants.
Oh,
just kidding.
Shitty pants. The old shitster.
The old shitster. Whale ship.
Whale ship. Shipman's motive for suicide was never established, though he reportedly told his probation officer that he was considering suicide to assure his wife's financial security after he was stripped of his National Health Service pension. Primrose Shipman received a full NHS pension, which she would not have been entitled to if Shipman had lived past the age of 60.
There should be a clause, though, in most of those cases that suicide negates that.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when he's doing it just so she's still eligible for that pension.
At the very least, he wanted to take care of her, so good on you for that, but...
What a gentleman.
Yeah.
Always thinking of others. Additionally, there was evidence that Primrose, who had consistently protested Shipman's innocence despite the overwhelming evidence, had begun to suspect his guilt. Shipman refused to take part in courses which would have encouraged acknowledgement of his crimes, leading to a temporary removal of privileges, including the opportunity to call his wife. During this period, according to Shipman's cellmate, he received a letter from Primrose encouraging him to, quote, "tell me everything, no matter what," end quote. A 2005 inquiry found that Shipman's suicide could not have been predicted or prevented, but that procedures should nonetheless be re-examined. After Shipman's body was released to his family, it remained in Sheffield for more than a year despite multiple false reports about his funeral. His widow was advised by police against burying her husband in case the grave was attacked. Shipman was eventually cremated on March 19, 2005, at Hutcliffe Wood Crematorium. The cremation took place outside normal working hours to maintain secrecy and was attended only by Primrose and the couple's 4 children. In July of 2002, an investigation concluded that he had killed at least 218 of his patients between 1975 and 1998, during which time he practiced in Todmorden and Hyde. Dame Janet Smith, the judge who submitted the report, admitted that many more deaths of a suspicious nature could not be definitively ascribed to Shipman. Most of his victims were elderly women in good health. In her final report, issued on January 24, 2005, Smith reported that she believed that Shipman had killed 3 patients, and she had serious suspicions about 4 further deaths, including that of a 4-year-old girl, during the early stage of his medical career at Pontefract General Infirmary, which is where he worked before opening up his own practice.
What the fuck? A 4-year-old? You're kidding me.
No, I'm not kidding.
Oh my
It's sad.
God.
Yeah.
And 218? Jesus Christ.
A fucking lot.
That's nuts.
In total, 459 people died while under his care between 1971 and 1998.
Holy fuck!
But it's uncertain how many of those were murder victims, as he was often the only doctor to certify a death. Smith's estimate of Shipman's total victim count over the 27-year period was 250, which is still a fucking lot.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. 250 people?
Yeah. That's over.
I don't understand how he didn't get caught sooner.
Right, because she suspects that 250, that's over half of the total deaths in his care over his 27-year period there. Over half of them was of suspicious nature. So yeah, I agree. I don't understand how nobody was suspicious of it sooner, or caught on, like the cab driver reporting it. Like, all these patients are going to him completely fine and then coming out dead.
No kidding. Like, that's just, it blows my mind.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that we find. How did you get away with that for almost 30 years?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I don't get it.
I guess it's easier when you own your own practice, though.
And you're a doctor, so you're rich. So nobody cares. In 2005, it came to light that Shipman may have stolen jewelry from his victims. In 1998, police had seized over 10,000 pounds worth of jewelry they found in his garage. In March 2005, when Primrose asked for its return, police wrote to the families of Shipman's victims asking them to identify the jewelry, which I don't understand why it took the police 7 years from the time they seized it to write the victims' families about it, but whatever.
Maybe they used it as evidence.
Maybe. But how would the police know it was actual victims' jewelry without asking the families first?
That's true. He's like, I was just going to have a yard sale.
That's funny because that's exactly what they do. They call it an auction, but... Unidentified items were handed to the Assets Recovery Agency in May. The investigation ended in August. Authorities returned 66 pieces to Primrose and auctioned 33 pieces that she confirmed were not hers. Proceeds of the auction went to Tameside Victim Support. The only piece returned to a murdered patient's family was a platinum diamond ring, for which the family provided a picture as proof of ownership. I mean, I understand why they had to provide proof of evidence, but this is 80s and 90s where pictures weren't just thousands of them on your phone. So
Exactly.
in order, if you saw your family members oh, that was her necklace I gave her,
Yeah.
and you couldn't even claim it because she didn't have a photograph of her wearing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Thankful for today's technology.
Exactly.
A memorial garden to Shipman's victims, called the Garden of Tranquility, opened in Hyde Park in Hyde on July 30th, 2005. As of early 2009, families of over 200 of the victims of Shipman were still seeking compensation for the loss of their relatives. In September 2009, letters Shipman wrote in prison to friends were to be sold at auction, but following complaints from victims' relatives and the media, the sale was withdrawn. The Shipman case led to changes to standard medical procedures in the UK, now referred to as the Shipman effect. Many doctors reported changes in their dispensing practices, and a reluctance to risk overprescribing pain medication may have led to underprescribing. Death certification practices were altered as well. Perhaps the largest change was the movement from single doctor general practices to multiple doctor general practices. This was due to reports stating that there was not enough safeguarding and monitoring of doctors' decisions. The forms needed for a cremation in England and Wales have had their questions altered as a direct result of the Shipman case. For example, the person or persons organizing the funeral must answer, quote, "Do you know or suspect that the death of the person who has died was violent or unnatural? Do you consider that there should be any further examination of the remains of the person who has died?" End quote. Smart, because if the family's questioning it, then they won't cremate the body.
Exactly.
Harold Shipman was nicknamed Dr. Death and the Angel of Death. He is the only British doctor to date to have been convicted of murdering his patients, although other doctors have been acquitted of similar crimes or convicted of lesser charges. He is the only one that's actually been convicted.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's nuts. I'm still just amazed. Like, even if it's just an estimate of 250 people, like, sure, that number could quite possibly be lower, but just imagine, like, how many there actually are. Like, if it's more than 250, like, they said there was, like, 400 and something, possibly, and I'm just like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
That
lot.
amazes me, you know, because I do understand that, yeah, it was the 80s and the 90s, but at the same time, I mean, science was really beginning to advance at that time, and not that you really needed science to, like, conclude that a doctor was killing his patients, but just common sense, you know, and I'm glad that cab driver had some, for sure, because who knows, he could still quite possibly be out there just fucking slaying people left and right.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if he hadn't forged his last victim's will, I mean, she had the doctor that was like, hold up, that's not right. Like, if he hadn't done that, imagine how many more victims he would have had.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
he just got greedy and wanted her money.
Yeah, he got sloppy, and then he got caught.
Which is literally the moral of every serial killer story. Don't get sloppy with your killings, because you will get caught.
That's not the message we want to send to people, Shayna. Just
my bad.
Don't kill people.
My bad.
But if you are going to kill people, don't get sloppy. Or do, because then we have more content.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I'm not saying you should do it.
I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying I understand. I tell that to my coworker Shannon all the time. I just gave her a shout out because I know she listens.
Hi, Shannon. I never hit her. I killed her, but I didn't hit her.
Yes, he was a gentleman. That's why he's my favorite.
One of these days, we're going to have to do a deep dive into my favorite serial killer.
Yes. Who's your favorite serial killer? Give him a little
David
tease.
Parker Ray.
Yes, the
Him and Jeffrey
killer.
Dahmer, but everybody knows about Jeffrey Dahmer. So.
Yes. The toy box killer is a doozy.
Yes, it is, and it deserves a full-on episode to itself.
Okay, so we hope you enjoyed learning about killer doctors with us this week. We only have one birthday shout out for this week. Fucking America, baby! Going strong since 1776. Celebrating its 247th fucking birthday.
Happy birthday, America. Nothing says I'm a red-blooded American like barbecuing and setting shit on fire. With that being said, we do hope that you have a safe and happy 4th of July.
America.
As always, we want to hear from you. Hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or email us at thickthighsmurdervibes@gmail.com. And don't forget to come back next week for Without a Trace. Bye!
America.